Hello and welcome everybody. My name is Livia Kohn. I'm the executive editor of Three Pines Press, the Western voice of Taoism. And I'm very excited to introduce the first publication of a new project, which will keep us busy for the next year or so. It is a series of 3 edited volumes on the subject of time in Taoist theory and philosophy and cultivation practice. And the 3 volumes came about on the basis of the International Taoist Conference with the subject of time, which was held at Loyola Marymount University in Los Angeles in June of 2019. And so our first volume is ready for publication. It is called Tao and Time, Classical Philosophy. And I'm very honored to have been able to edit this and to have a wonderful team of contributors. And one of them is here with us today. It is David Chai from Hong Kong. So welcome, David.
Thank you, Professor Kohn.
And so our first question is going to be to get to know David a little bit better and to find out where he's from and what his current situation is. So tell us a little bit about your training and your current situation.
Okay, thank you for inviting me to take part in this conversation regarding the book. I did my education at the University of Toronto, excuse me. I'm trained in sinology as opposed to philosophy. I was under the supervision, PhD supervision by Vincent Shen Qingsong. And if you are familiar with him, you know that he is very broadly learned. So I had exposure to many different traditions and thinkers, ways of doing academic scholarship. And this has kind of worked its way into my professional writing. I do a lot of comparative work, East-West comparative work, intercultural work within the Chinese tradition. Currently, I'm at the Chinese University of Hong Kong in the Department of Philosophy, where I'm an associate professor. And I have some wonderful colleagues. Previously, Liu Xiaogan was there. Professor Huang Yong is there. We have a lot of visiting scholars, so it's a good place to be, especially for the study of Taoist philosophy. Generally, my approach to Taoism is not narrowly defined in terms of philosophy versus religion, classical versus medieval or pre-modern. I'm all over the map, so to speak. But my approach to discussing Taoist texts perhaps is rooted more in the Western tradition than in the Eastern, in terms of I'm asking questions more of a metaphysical or a cosmological nature, as opposed to tradition, practices of cultivation or self-learning, self-enlightenment. And the reason I do that is because I think Taoism as an academic field has kind of cornered itself a little bit. There's been a lot of discussion over the past decades, but we seem to be going around in circles in terms of the themes and the approaches to these themes. So I'm trying to break open that kind of closed loop way of discussing Taoism by introducing new methodologies and reading commentaries to the texts to kind of encourage the younger generation of scholars to really rethink what is Taoism, because I don't view it as a philosophy religion kind of dichotomy. It's all the same thing, and it's all concerned with answering a few fundamental questions regarding human life, human existence, and the significance of that. And that's what I try to do through all of my work, is to share with the non-expert reader the broader implications of Taoism for us as modern beings, and what we can learn and what we can benefit from these very ancient arguments and people. I think it's very relevant for the life that we have today, and for solving many of the problems or the questions that we pose and we encounter today. I think Taoism can do that much more successfully than Confucianism or other schools within philosophy, broadly speaking. So that's what I try to do.
So in other words, you find yourself being in this position of being a bridge. So
Yes.
you're bridging from like the Western to the Chinese tradition, using certain Western concepts to open up different perspectives of Taoism, but then at the same time also opening Taoist ideas to Western thinkers who
Exactly.
often are not familiar with them and who don't have the vocabulary and the access to really engage with them, but who would really benefit greatly from the Taoist kind of perspective. And you
Yes.
also mentioned that you have the bridge between the more theoretical and the practice, in the sense that you don't see that dichotomy between religion and philosophy, where I've been a bridge all these years, and bringing practitioners into Taoist conferences and having a section of practitioner papers in the Journal of Taoist Studies, and so the whole idea that as you are, and body and mind are not dichotomies in this system either. You're bridging that, because as you change your thinking, so your identity and your way of being in your body changes, which is all about that. Cognitive psychology works that way. But the other way is also true. As you're doing certain things like in Tai Chi or certain kinds of practices, your bodily feelings change, and that impacts your thinking. So there's no, all these traditional dichotomies need at this stage to be bridged and eventually to be overcome. So we're moving, and I find this very inspiring, and it's a wonderful way of taking Taoism to the next level. So you're also essentially creating Taoist philosophy for the 21st century. And this is one of the things that I've personally also always been very critical about, is this idea that Taoist philosophy sort of ends with the Han Dynasty, which is complete nonsense.
Yes.
It's the religious tradition, which is full of Taoist thinkers. And then also even within other traditions where people comment, you have Buddhist and Confucian commentaries on the Tao Te Ching, on the Zhuangzi, where you have this intellectual discussion and debate. The philosophy has continued. And so it is very important to bring Taoist philosophy into the 21st century and to create that next level. And there's no reason why this would have to be done in Chinese. This can be perfectly fine done in English or French.
Yes, German, Russian, Japanese, you name it.
Exactly. Russian or Japanese, exactly. So the language, they do not have to be limiting. On the contrary, as you are working with different languages, you can start to pull out different dimensions of the teachings that you may not even be able to see from the Chinese itself.
And you yourself recently, your work, Taoism and science, Taoism and cosmology. We can go into astronomy. We can go into medicine. There are so many branches that we can use Taoism to reinterpret, to kind of reconfigure the perspective of these.
Exactly.
We modern we've isolated.
And it's a mutual relationship. You're using the science to understand what the heck the Taoists are doing, and then you use the Taoists to see, where science could open up in different dimensions. It's such a fruitful dialogue, and it's very encouraging to see that on the philosophical level.
Go ahead.
Let me move on.
I was just going to say that also you mentioned the post-Han period. You yourself have have talked about that, collaborating with Harold Roth, for example, Michael Lafargue, many, many years ago now. And I more recently have done work on Huanglao Taoism and then on Neo-Taoism, Weijin Xuanxue. And I think that's important for us to continue to do in this volume as well, including commentaries from the post-Han period to show that there was this continuity of conversation. There was this continuity of interest in these classical texts. But what changed is the application, right? The way we interpret these texts to suit the historical context in which these figures or we ourselves are living. And I think that's the brilliance of Laozhuang philosophy or Taoist, early Taoist so-called religion, right? Cultivation practices. It's timeless, and that's one of the beautiful things about the volume that you've edited here, Tao and Time. It's timeless, and I think a lot of people have the wrong idea, and that Taoism is it's mystical, and it's a mysticism of high antiquity, and it has absolutely no connection to any kind of pre-modern, early modern ways of thinking. And this volume will show that no, that's not the case. It's highly relevant, and in fact, it forces us to perhaps reverse the order of dominance. Western philosophy has always been the dominant methodological way, and we can say no. Actually, Taoism had all of these ideas, concepts, arguments 2,500 years ago. So analytic philosophy has nothing to hold. Taoism should be in every philosophy department worldwide. It's highly significant. So
yes, it's very important. It really is, especially the way the world is going. Taoist philosophy, as you said earlier, has huge amounts of things. Both the philosophy and the practices have huge amounts of things to contribute, and to create like a whole vision of integration and harmony, and the whole way of being in the world that Taoists propose has so much to offer in this century. It's just amazing. So let me move on to the subject of time. So in your presentation in the book, you focus especially on the story of the fish, the happiness of fish, which is one of the classic parables in the Zhuangzi. And and you reinterpret it under the auspices of time. So if you could say a few words about that.
Yeah. Well, this, as you've said, this is perhaps one of the most famous stories in the Zhuangzi. I think this and the butterfly dream story and Butcher Ding, these are classic tales. But what I found is that when people discuss the Joy of Fish story, they tend to do it from a Western analytic perspective, either philosophy of language or ethics, and nobody really has discussed, what Zhuangzi is trying to do. Why use this analogy, the joy of fish? It seems almost kind of paradoxical. Fish can't be happy because we don't know what their happiness is. We don't see them smiling and laughing. So how can we as humans possibly know? So for me to write this paper, this is one thing I wanted to do. I wanted to offer not necessarily a corrective reading, but a fresh reading from a wholly different perspective. And one way to do that is through the perspective of time. And this builds upon work that I've done elsewhere on my definition of the Taoist concept of time, or what I call non-time, meontological time, to use a big word, the time of non-being. So this is the time before there was the division of time and non-time. So the kind of ultimate or perfect time of Tao. So that's the setting for the paper. And what we discover in reading the story and the two passages on fish before the Joy of Fish story, and then all the commentaries that touch upon this, is that the Joy of Fish story is not, as scholars so far have kind of argued, it's a debate with Zhuangzi and his logician friend Hui Shi. So it's about philosophy of language, or it's about the question of knowing. Can humans know something absolutely, or know non-human species, what they are thinking and feeling? I think from the point of time, if you look at the role of the sage in Taoism, where the sage kind of absolves all distinctions, no matter at what level we're talking about, then the question becomes very simple. And it's not, can Zhuangzi know the joy of fish? It becomes like, why doesn't everybody know the joy of fish? Because on a kind of primordial level, right, the level of oneness with Tao, we are essentially indistinguishable from fish in terms of the level of being, so ontology, and that also would then lead to the question of temporality. Oneness of Tao necessarily paves the way for a kind of non-temporal experience. Otherwise, how can it be oneness? So this is the kind of framework that I use to reread the story, and I break it down into three different, if you like, levels or realms of time based on my previous work. So the human level, the cosmological level, and then the top level, or the most profound level, is the level of Tao time, which is non-time. So it's basically all possibilities realized and unrealized. And at that level, the level where I feel the sage resides or tries to remain, at that level, the Zhuangzi and the fish are really one and the same thing. So the joy of fish story is not about the reality or the particularity of the species of fish, but it becomes a metaphor for kind of self-awareness. Zhuangzi and the fish are, one and the same thing. So if you know yourself from the perspective of Tao, then you are like fish. You are free in your environment. So if you want to know what that freedom in Tao means, all you need to do is look at animals in their natural settings, and the fish is one, and there are other stories in the text. Zhuangzi in the forest, and we see the whole chain of predators there. So where in the chain do you situate yourself? So I think it's a very inspirational story. It's humorous. It's not serious. Some people use analytic philosophy to deconstruct the question of Anzhi, from where do you know the happiness? No, it's not about that. Zhuangzi is not so serious and kind of self-obsessing over questions of, well, how do I explain? It's just things are the way they are, and there is no how, there is no why. Right? So when you go out and you happen to stand next to a stream and you see fish there or shrimp, the fact that they are free in the stream, that is what human freedom could possibly mean if you follow Tao, if you are one with Tao. And if you go into a forest and you see deer or birds or wherever you happen to be, any animal that behaves naturally, without any kind of self-conscious awareness of it behaving in that way, that is an extension of this harmony with Tao. And that's why I think Zhuangzi uses this story, because in ancient China, hunter-gatherer society, people naturally would have fished. So fishermen would have had intimate knowledge of the life cycle of fish. So we take that and we extend it and we apply it to a lesson that humans can learn from in terms of how to be genuinely human, right? So non-self-conscious, non-pretentious, non-judgmental. And I think, the connection with time in this story and throughout the Zhuangzi is one of those hidden threads that a lot of contemporary scholars have overlooked. It runs right through the text, like in the Tao Te Ching, like in any Taoist text, because the circularity of time is the kind of fabric for life, and everything evolves out of that. The circularity life and death, of good and bad health, of intellectual clarity versus confusion. All of these things are cyclical, repetitive patterns. And if we know the history of Taoism, we know from the Warring States through the Han, the post-Han, it's the same kind of theme, but being slightly reworked, right? Depending on the historical period. So this text and my particular chapter, I think is a fantastic opportunity to show people not familiar with Zhuangzi specifically, or Taoism generally, that Taoism, it's not about being reclusive and kind of running away from the world. It's about learning to live in the world, but to live beyond all the pettiness and everything associated with this kind of self-interested behavior, to live beyond all of that. And that's how you can retain your freedom or your harmony with everything in the world. But if you don't understand the concept of time, you can't really do that. So this is one of the reasons why I chose this story in particular. I think it's a wonderful illustration of how we can learn from other species, non-human species, but also how we can teach ourselves the more proper way of living.
Good. Well, that's wonderful. And so this brings it all very nicely together, and it really summarizes the purpose of the volume as a whole, and all the other different presentations is to really create a forum for the understanding of Taoism, to open Taoist philosophy, traditional Taoist thought, to a new perspective, to get new materials such as the excavated text, but also well-known materials in new perspective. So we really open up this thread, like as you said, that time constitutes, and that it's sort of there, but it has never really been pulled out and discussed. And so we are really opening up a whole new dimension of this discussion, both of the understanding of time, because the way Taoists understand time and work with time is quite different from things in other cultures. So time studies will also benefit. And also people who would like to know more about Taoism can look at the tradition from this perspective. So let me thank you for participating, and to remind our listeners and viewers that the volume is called Tao and Time, Classical Philosophy, and you can find it on our website, 3pintspress.com. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for having me.